Gerald, Mabruk on the book, and we'll be happy to welcome you as an honorary lawyer. As you know, we're a very kind group. I don't know whether you know the story of the very prosperous lawyer who was driving home in his enormous limousine and he saw a poor man by the side of the road eating grass. And he stopped the car and said, "What are you doing?" And the man said, "I'm hungry. That's all I have is to eat grass." So the very kind lawyer says, "Get into my car. I'll take you home." And the man says, "Actually, I have here all my family, and sure enough, and they're all eating grass." So the lawyer says, "You know what, we'll squeeze in, all get into the car, I'll take you all home." As they were driving, the poor man turned to the lawyer and says, "This is very, very kind of you." And the lawyer said, "Think nothing of it, my lawn needs mowing." So we are a kind lot. Francoise pointed out that a commission of inquiry should really deal with fact, but in point of fact, they deal with legal issues. And it's at this point that I want to take up. Because I feel to a certain extent commissions of inquiries, when they take up legal issues with Israel, they do it on the basis of Israel is sui generis, which, as you know, is not a form of Chinese cooking, but it means one at a time, one at a time. And if one looks at various legal issues that have been discussed, you find they've been applied very, very particularly to Israel. There's a recent report of the International Commission and Committee of the Red Cross, which Professor Kretschmer and I were working on reading, and it examines when does a law of occupation apply. And it's a very thorough legal study which says that in order for an area to be occupied, there must be effective control, and they even use the nice phrase, there must be boots on the ground. Very sensible, but by the way, this reflects international law. For an area to be under occupation, there must be boots on the ground. In other words, you must have your forces on the ground. At the end of it, it says, despite that, the Gaza Strip is still occupied by Israel. Why? Because it's sui generis, one of a type. And some of us asked the representative of the Red Cross, why is it? Well, you know, Israel is sui generis. We're one of a kind. Frankly, I would love to be one of the crowd occasionally and not one of the kind. I've taken some other issues where I think we are sui generis, special law applicable to Israel. One of them is civilian, and this also follows on to something that Francoise was talking about. Civilian casualties in times of war means you committed a war crime. Many civilian casualties means you committed a serious war crime. When I was studying law, one of the courses we had to do was Introduction to Psychology. And I remember something being taught there which stuck in my mind. You ask little children the following question. If a child deliberately breaks one plate, or another child accidentally breaks 10 plates, who is a naughtier child? And the answer depends on the maturity of the answering. An immature child will say, obviously the child who broke 10 plates is wickeder, he's more naughty. The moment you get the child reaches a certain age of maturity, you'll realize that the child who broke accidentally is less naughtier child than the child who broke a fewer plates deliberately. And this, again, is the point Francoise was making. The points of the law of war, what did you intend? Did you intend to kill civilians? Were you reckless? Were you even negligent? All of these can imply fault. But we have here, when it's applied to Israel, a completely different criterion. There are civilian casualties. It's irrespective of how careful you were, you are guilty of a war crime. And by the way, traveling, as all of us do here around the world, you see this, but you cause civilian casualties. You could ask how many civilian casualties were caused by the British force, how many French civilian casualties were caused by the Allied landing at Normandy. Was this a war crime? But Israel is sui generis. Another rule that I found to be sui generis for Israel is proportionality. Now, proportionality is a legitimate rule of law. You must not cause disproportionate civilian casualties. But that's not what they're talking about. They said your military response was disproportionate to the military attack in times of armed conflict. There's a new rule being developed. If the enemy shoots at you with a rifle, you can only reply with a rifle if you're Israel. If you reply with a heavier weapon, that's disproportionate. This frankly goes against any rule of military strategy. You want to use disproportionate force. You want to get there with more force. You want to concentrate your forces so that on a particular place you have more firepower than the enemy. But if Israel is concerned, no, it's disproportionate. What other sui generis rules have I found? Self-defense is permitted against any attack, except where Israel is concerned, it must be an attack by a state. And we have this very strange decision of the opinion of the International Court of Justice on the war case, which explicitly said no, Israel has no right, because we try to put an explanation of defense was necessary as self-defense against suicide attacks. And the interesting answer of the ICJ, the International Court, was you have no right of self-defense because you were not attacked by a foreign state. The area is under your control, therefore you could arrest the people, but you could not, and they didn't even examine whether it was a legitimate act of self-defense, which, by the way, the Israeli High Court did. They said, look, it's a legitimate self-defense, and we have to check whether the damage to civilians in each case is proportional or not. The ICJ said no. Sui generis for Israel. What else? Here I'm getting slightly political. Armistice lines. Now, it's a political decision whether we in Israel, with the Palestinians, will adopt the 67 armistice line as a political boundary. Each one of us has his own views, and that's not the issue. But to say legally it's a boundary exists only for Israel. In no other circumstance is an armistice demarcation line, which was created as a temporary line, somehow have the imprint of being a legal boundary. Only for Israel, sui generis. And again, I'm not going into the question whether we might adopt it or not. That's a political issue. But to say legally this is a boundary, when the Arab states, at their insistence, put into the armistice agreement that it's a temporary line, and it's not a boundary, and it's not a recognition, and they continue with that position, somehow it's been transformed into a political boundary. What other sui generis? We all know, if you hear information, Arab information, military occupation is illegal. It's become a byword. It's not so. Under the laws of war, military occupation doesn't sound attractive. I don't suggest we go and sell it as an Israeli contribution to world culture. It doesn't sound nice. And it has all the associations and implications of Europe. But it's not illegal. Under the laws of war, it is legal. The US occupation of Japan was not illegal after the Second World War, nor that of Germany. Nor the recent US occupation of Iraq was not, in fact, was approved by the Security Council. In point of fact, the Security Council has never called it illegal. That doesn't help us. You talk to anybody who say, what, the Israeli, they go together, legal Israeli occupation. What else? There's obvious, people have a right to return to their country. However, this somehow has become a rule of international law that people have a right to return to the country where they never lived, where they're never citizens, including their descendants. Now again, I'm not saying what the solution should be, but to say there's a rule of law, the descendants of people who never lived in the country have a right to return, but this is accepted. You'll find anywhere, well, of course, the right to return. It's a sui generis rule for Israel. Separation barrier may not be attractive. It doesn't look nice. And all of us who've taken visitors, when you see a fence, it doesn't look nice. It harms the Palestinians. It cuts them off from their fields. I think it was necessary for self-defense, but it's not attractive. But to say it's apartheid, this is a completely new definition of Israel, a definition of apartheid only for Israel. A security fence, which perhaps could be moved, but this is apartheid, only for Israel. And the final point that I want to make is that one of the sui generis rules applicable only for Israel is that UN General Assembly resolutions are binding and reflect international law. You'll find students from throughout the world, and I find it, they say, well, there's a UN General Assembly resolution. And I ask them, is that binding? Well, of course, it's the UN. Not a single state on the world is on record in saying that UN General Assembly resolutions are binding, or that they are accepted as binding. But as far as Israel is concerned, well, you're violating UN security, UN General Assembly resolutions. Sui generis only for Israel. There's a lovely description by a lawyer who Ilan knows, Dept knows, Francoise knows, Prosper Weil wrote in an article on this issue. And I'll end with this quote. There is no warrant for considering that by dint of repetition, non-normative resolutions can be transmuted into positive law through a sort of incantatory effect, but except for Israel. Thank you.